You're listening to Emerging Global by Bne IntelliNews.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Emerging Global. I'm Daniel Rad and I'm here this week with Bruce Pannier, who is an expert on Central Asia and Russia. And today we're going to be talking about the developments in Turkmenistan and Russia's relationship with the Central Asian country. Bruce, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Can you tell us more about Turkmenistan? Not many people know the country. It's fairly well isolated, and it's one of the poorer performers of the post-Soviet Union space.
Oh, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, it was one of the 15 former Soviet republics. It's kind of tucked away in the southwestern corner of Central Asia. It borders Iran, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and the Caspian Sea. It was unfortunate for Turkmenistan that it suffers most from poor management and poor leadership in 1992, 1993, 1994, when the then first president of Turkmenistan, Saparmurat Niyazov, was saying that it was going to be the second Kuwait, and there was reason to believe that that would be true. I mean, they knew it had huge reserves of natural gas. They didn't know exactly how much that was, but subsequent audits of the fields in Turkmenistan have determined that it's probably got the fourth largest gas reserves in the world at the moment. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the country was just poorly managed. In 1995, they managed to slip through a UN resolution that made them gave them official status as a neutral state. It was like on a list of like 180 or something items on the UN agenda that they were looking at, and it was almost the last one. So the UN said, yeah, sure, you got it. Now what Turkmenistan did with that, this official neutral status, was to isolate themselves. They wouldn't join on to almost anything. I mean, they said, we were happy to join in an economic union, but we don't want to be partners with anybody in anything else, no security organizations, none of that stuff. So they managed to wall themselves off, and gradually this almost became a physical wall. They managed to greatly limit the amount of internet penetration into the country. They don't let their population move around inside the country, but they don't let them move around out, and they don't let them leave very often, only to do migrant labor work in Turkey, in particular, some in Russia. And they've cut exposure to the outside world almost entirely. And that has left them in the position that they're in now, where it's strange, but even with neighboring those countries and then building themselves as the crossroads of Eurasia, it's a really isolated country, and the people there don't have much access to information. They're really unaware of what's happening in the outside world. I mean, to the point where, historically, even to the point where when the U.S. started its operation in Afghanistan in late 2001, people in Turkmenistan didn't even know that was happening at all. And this has been true of almost every piece of major news that's gone on since then, is that the Turkmen people are unaware that any of this is happening, and only a very little bit filters through as state media approves what kind of information they're going to let their population know. So it's really unfortunate. I've been to Turkmenistan a lot many years ago. The people are absolutely fabulous, very curious. Very nice people, but unfortunately they live under this system that really looks at them as just a resource and one that needs to be kept in line constantly.
The government recently changed. The president is the son of the former president. How has that changed its regional standing?
Well, as you can imagine, it really didn't change very much since we had a father-to-son transfer. Gurbanguly Berdimuhammedov became president when Saparmurat Niyazov died in late 2006. He finally decided to hand over power to his son. There's been rumors of health issues with the older Berdimuhammedov, although health issues and rumors of health issues plague Central Asian leaders practically since day one. But there was reason to believe that maybe the Papa Berdimuhammedov was having some problems, so he decided to transfer power to his son. The election was just a couple years ago. The son really wasn't. I mean, he's still the youngest leader in Central Asia. Though he's in his early 40s. The system was kept in place, although his son appears to have not done as well being president as the father expected, because they had to rearrange the way the system was run. Previously, it had been purely a presidential state. The president had the last word on anything. Last year, they managed to rearrange everything so that now this body called the Halk Maslahati, it translates to the People's Council. It was really just a rubber stamping organization with very little power until they changed it and gave it its new status. Now, why did they give it a new status? Because the elder Berdi Muhammadov was the chairman of that People's Council. So they elevated it. Now it has all the power in the country, and he, as chairman, is actually the one that's running the country, even though his son remains the president.
So we have a similar situation to its southern neighbor now. We have an executive president and a supreme leader on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously there's a lot of rumors about problems between father and son. You don't see that too much. Again, it's a closed society. It's very difficult to get it. You can get information, but it's very difficult to verify it. That's the best way to put it. So for now, it's still the father and son tandem. But, when any important decisions need to be made, it's clear that the father is the one that's making the decisions, and he's still on, state television and in-state media all the time. And it's understood by everybody that when there's something important going on, as I said, he's the one that's actually there. He goes out and makes all the gas deals. When there's big matters of foreign policy, some conference or something, he's the one that attends the conference. So, that's the situation in the country. It's still the same. Different guy, it's the son, not the father, but the system is the same as the father, the same system the father oversaw.
So we're going to move on to the crux of your article recently that was on IntelliNews.com. Can you tell us more about Turkmenistan's current position in the global natural gas markets?
This again goes back to its policy of isolationism. It was understood that Turkmenistan had a lot of gas, but the Turkmen policy was that we have the gas, and if you build a pipeline to our border, then we'll connect you to our gas supply, and you can, and then you can import our gas from us and pay us money for that. So it's it's already not a very attractive proposition. But beyond that, they've been unwilling to give any onshore contracts to anybody. They do have offshore reserves, and they do have foreign companies that are operating those, notably Petronas from Malaysia, Dragon Oil, UAE. A couple others have tried their hand at this at one time or another too, but they don't. The big money is on the onshore contracts, and they've been unwilling to let anyone get into that. So it's hard to get investment to build a pipeline to Turkmenistan. The Trans-Caspian is the one everyone always talks about, but essentially the Turkmen deal is that if you want to spend all the money to build the Trans-Caspian pipeline and get it to our shore, then you can get gas from us. But again, no opportunity to get the onshore contract, the upstream contract, which is where the big money is. So it hasn't proven that lucrative to many people, and it's the same with the TAPI pipeline, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India. It's a little bit different. That Turkmenistan actually is managing that pipeline, but their original position was the same. You build the pipeline, hook it up to Turkmenistan, and then we'll ship the gas. I have to mention that there is one country that has managed to get an onshore contract, and that is the China National Petroleum Corporation. And even that is an interesting story because it's on the right bank of the Amu Darya River. So that what Turkmenistan did, and this goes all the way back to when Niyazi was president, was they said, we will give you the contract to explore and develop this field that's on the right side of the Amu Darya. And why would they do that, even in the case of China? Because that is adjacent to Uzbekistan. And so the thought was, although they didn't say it publicly, but it's clear that what they were thinking was that if they let the Chinese run the field there, they wouldn't have to worry about Uzbekistan trying to annex that part, which is not divided in any way from the rest of Uzbekistan. But with the presence of Chinese workers there, it was kind of a shield against Uzbekistan making a land grab and saying, well, the obvious border of our two countries should be the river and not this patch of land that's on our side of the river to begin with. So the Chinese lucked out. There was actually a lot of gas there. And so they ended up doing well in the end. But otherwise, like I said, no one else has been able to get access to actual development of the fields, the other huge fields, some of them, we're talking trillions of cubic meters of gas. The Turkmen government's happy to buy equipment from other countries and use that there, but they're not willing to let any countries or any business, any organization, company from another country actually have an onshore contract. A lot of people think that's because of their fear of foreigners. Again, it's isolated country, and by not granting these contracts to foreign companies, you don't have to worry about having foreign workers or even representatives of foreign countries on your territory either. So again, it kind of keeps Turkmenistan walled off from the outside world. There's hardly any foreigners in the country that anyone could talk to. Or they could spy, I suppose. And the Turkmen government's pretty paranoid. They could spy on Turkmenistan from within.
There was a recent deal between Iran, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan. Can you tell us more about that one?
Yeah, that was a gas swap deal. What happened here was, again, Turkmenistan, as time has gone by, the officials in Turkmenistan have finally started to realize that they really made a lot of mistakes, and they haven't actively pursued selling their gas as much as they should have, and this has been a problem. Before I get to the gas swap story, I have to mention that Iran used to buy gas from Turkmenistan, and for up to 8 billion cubic meters sometimes. The first two gas pipelines that were built, the first one certainly that was built in the independence days, was built from Turkmenistan to Iran to supply gas to northern Iran. There's a second one, too. So Turkmenistan was selling gas to Iran. They had a dispute. Turkmenistan said that Iran had not paid for gas that it had used 10 years earlier, almost. And so Turkmenistan decided to cut off the gas to Iran, which was unfortunate because Turkmenistan really needed to market their gas to somebody. Admittedly, it was a barter deal, so they weren't getting cash; they were getting goods from Iran. But anyway, they cut Iran off, and to this day, that still holds. They're still not exporting gas to Iran. So now we get to the swap deal. Azerbaijan is willing to buy a relatively small amount of gas from Turkmenistan. It's usually about 1 billion cubic meters. It can get closer to 2 during some years. But this deal is that Turkmenistan will ship gas via the pipelines that were built since independence to Iran. Iran keeps that gas in its northern territory next to the Turkmen border and uses it for its own purposes, and then uses Iranian gas to sell to Azerbaijan. But Azerbaijan has been pretty crafty about this too. The only time they import this gas is during the summer when gas prices are low, and they use it to top off their own storage reserves. So they buy the gas when it's cheap in the summer, and then in the winter they have this gas saved up, and some of it goes for gasification in the country, and some of it goes for export at a higher price than they bought it for during the summer months. There's been problems with this deal. It's on and off. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Last year they managed to export supposedly, or reportedly, I'll say, 1.5 billion cubic meters of gas. But again, it's not a game changer for Turkmenistan. It's a small amount of money, better than nothing, but it's certainly not, the volumes that Turkmenistan talks about that they're able to supply to countries. They've talked about, 55, 60, 80 billion cubic meters to China if they want, 33 billion cubic meters to India and Pakistan, 30 billion cubic meters to the European Union. So again, 1.5 billion cubic meters is better than nothing. It's far short of these grandiose schemes they've been talking about for 30 years.
The major issue they have at the moment is with Russia, as you mentioned in your article. Russia is taking more of their market share, considering they're still at war with Ukraine. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, well, one of the effects of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine was that the European Union realized that it really had to cut its dependence on Russian hydrocarbons, imports of Russian hydrocarbons. So one of the first things they did was to say they weren't going to buy Russian oil and they weren't going to buy Russian gas. I mean, obviously they're weaning themselves off both. You can't just cut it that fast. But they have reduced it greatly. Now, Russia was exporting between 150 and 160 billion cubic meters of gas to Europe annually. So, now it's been, like I said, it's been cut substantially. At least 80% of that is cut out now. So now what does Russia do with this gas? It lost its biggest and best customer since the European Union was paying premium prices for this gas too. I mean, let's, face it, right before the invasion of Ukraine, gas prices were up over $1,000 per 1,000 cubic meters, and then even approaching $2,000 at some point. So they lost that customer right then. But what do you do with all this gas? Well, Russia's reoriented. They decided that they were going to start shipping to Asia as much a customer that you really want in Asia if you're going to pivot like this. But in the meantime, they had to make do with whatever Russia had to make do with whoever they could find to buy their gas. It was fortuitous, I suppose, from the Russian point of view, that Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, for example, have had very, very difficult times during the last few winters. It was obvious they've been short of gas. They also haven't moved very quickly on gasification or improving their domestic infrastructure for energy distribution. So what Russia was able to do was use existing pipelines from the Soviet era, which once carried gas from Central Asia to Russia, and reverse the flow. And so they've managed to get Kazakhstan as a customer. They managed to get Uzbekistan as a customer. Last year, they shipped about 7.5 billion cubic meters of gas to Kazakhstan. They just signed a contract, a 15-year contract that starts next year to ship gas to Kazakhstan. Uzbekistan, they were shipping, it was only 2.8 billion cubic meters was the original deal. But they've managed to get another deal whereby they're going to sell at least pretty soon, I think even by 2026, they'll start selling 11 billion cubic meters of gas to Uzbekistan annually. They also locked in Kyrgyzstan. It's much smaller market, obviously, but they have a 15-year contract with Kyrgyzstan that they just signed. So now why is this important for Turkmenistan? Because Turkmenistan's a Central Asian neighbor. Turkmenistan's already having difficulties selling its gas to anybody. They're looking for anybody to sell gas to. I mean, they've made that clear at the start of this year that they are willing to sell to anyone who's willing to buy. Unfortunately, Russia has cut them out of the market in their own neighborhood. But beyond that, what's even more troubling from the Turkmen point of view is that the other pipelines that have been built since independence were built by China National Petroleum Corporation, and they run from Turkmenistan through Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan to China. Now, there's supposed to be 4 strands. Only 3 of them are built with a combined 55 billion cubic meters of gas a year that they can hold. Since Turkmenistan canceled the contract with Iran, Russia canceled the contract for Turkmen gas. I should have mentioned that a while ago, but 15 years ago, Russia was buying 40 billion cubic meters of gas from Turkmenistan. Russia didn't need it, but they had the pipeline all set up, and so Russia would buy it at a very cheap price and then ship it off to usually customers that had trouble paying, Armenia, Ukraine, Georgia, and leave Turkmenistan to figure out how they were going to collect on this money. But so Russia also canceled the contract because they really didn't need it. They canceled in 2016, I think, at the start of the year. And then they did eventually agree that they were going to buy a much smaller amount. But the point is that that left Turkmenistan with one customer. The pipelines from China had started working in late 2009. The first one did. There's, like I said, lines A, B, and C with combined 55 billion cubic meter capacity are all working now. But that's the only customer Turkmenistan has, except for this very small gas swap deal with Iran and Azerbaijan. So Russia has also figured out that, and I know this is a complicated explanation. I hope I'm making this as simple as possible. But the 55 billion cubic meters of gas of capacity from these 3 pipelines, because the pipelines run through Uzbek and Kazakh territory, China decided, and China paid for the construction of the pipeline, and of course, so the customer, that Uzbekistan should get 10 billion cubic meters of that capacity, and Kazakhstan should get 10 billion cubic meters of capacity to make everything fair. Again, this was years ago before the energy shortages. So that means 20 billion cubic meters out of the 55 billion cubic meters is actually already designated for use by Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Now, we know that they don't have any gas to export anymore. They're importing gas from Russia. So that leaves 20 billion cubic meters of spare capacity in these pipelines. Now, Kazakhstan's ambassador to Russia, right before this last Victory Day, gave an interview to TASS, and he said that they have a roadmap deal with Russia to export 35 billion cubic meters of gas, transit 35 billion cubic meters of Russian gas to China. The only pipelines that run from Kazakhstan to China are the 3 pipelines that come out of Turkmenistan, which makes it look like what's happening here is that Russia's taking the 20 billion cubic meters that belong to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and also adding 15 billion cubic meters, which up till now has been Turkmen gas that they're shipping out there. So that leaves Turkmenistan with only 20 billion cubic meters out of the 35 billion cubic meters that they should have. So not only did Turkmenistan lose the potential Uzbek and Kazakh markets, which weren't huge, but still would be substantial for Turkmenistan, but they're about to lose almost half their gas sales to China from the looks of it too, which is going to put them in a horrible economic situation because 80% of Turkmenistan's revenues come from gas sales. So they're looking at losing, again, almost half those revenues are about to vanish.
With that being the case, and Russia, and China working together in that sense, where does this leave Turkmenistan in the next few years?
Obviously, they're in a horrible place. And this is why you see the desperation. They're trying to make this look as businesslike as calm and businesslike as possible. But the fact that they're talking about we'll sell gas to Azerbaijan, Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and it's basically like anybody that wants to buy our gas, please, we got the gas and we're willing to sell it. What they're not willing to do is change their original terms of, you build the pipeline and we'll give you the gas. What they need to do is start giving some onshore contracts or say that they're willing to invest in pipelines. But like I said, they're left with really China as the only solid customer, and they're about to lose half that market, which explains why there's been so much frantic activity with Turkmenistan and the European Union. Anyone that's been following Turkmenistan sees that they meet with European Union officials all the time now. It's been true, since the start of this year, including a very unusual meeting just a couple months ago where the foreign minister, Turkmen foreign minister, Rashid Meredov, was in Brussels. And he was meeting, and he was speaking English at the meeting. And he might have known English a long time, but no, I did not know that. And I asked a bunch of my friends in the Turkmen service at Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, other people who had been following Turkmenistan too, and said, did you know that Meredov could speak English? And no one had ever heard him speak English before. So it shows the lengths that they're kind of going to, is that they're not only meeting with European officials, but they're trying to show that they're willing to bend over backward a little bit, and do this instead of bringing a translator or speaking Russian and depending upon the European Union to bring in a Russian translator. They sent Meredov out who speaks English all of a sudden. But like I said, more importantly for Turkmenistan, they've been, every month, at least every month, since this year started, they've been meeting with European Union officials trying to work out some kind of deal. They're fortunate that Turkey is also very anxious to do that. Turkey wants to be a gas hub. They see an opportunity here for themselves. They've really been pushing Turkmenistan to get its gas across the Caspian somehow or another, or through Iran, possibly via some kind of much larger swap deal than the one they have with Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has been pushing Turkmenistan to do this too. I mean, they actually have deals signed where Turkey is saying, we have a contract to sell Turkmen gas to Europe. The only problem is there's no physical link to get the gas as far as Turkey at the moment. So that's the situation we're in. It's clear the Turkmen are desperate. It's clear that a lot of people are trying to help them out and get them to get their gas west. But realistically, you can't, even if they're going to build a pipeline, it's going to take a couple of years.
But even with that pipeline, I've covered the Iranian angle for a few years, and they've often protested such a pipeline across the Caspian for that, obviously they would get cut out of any potential deals. So do you think there's any actual chance that this will happen?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's so many variables involved in this. The first is what happens with Russia's war on Ukraine. Russia's attention is focused on Ukraine at the moment, so that it might open the window a little bit for somebody to do something in the Caspian and build this pipeline finally, particularly if Turkey is, as it seems to be, very strongly on the side of building this pipeline. That's always been Turkmenistan's problem in building this Caspian pipeline. One of the problems, anyway, is that they really needed someone, a very much stronger power or powers to step up and when Russia and Iran raise objections to the pipeline, that they could counter and say, we're willing to guarantee it. And we don't particularly have to listen to your opinion. We'll send our own people in and do the feasibility study and make sure all the safety measures are met. And that's going to have to be enough for you, Iran, and you, Russia, that we're going to keep an eye on this and make sure it's done. So Turkey might be able to fill that role at the minute. We see that under Erdogan, Turkey is descending. They're rising again. Clearly, Mr. Erdogan sees Turkey as now as being something of a second Ottoman Empire. He really wants them to have a lot of international prestige. Enforcing the construction of a Trans-Caspian pipeline would go a lot toward the image that he seems to be building in Turkey anyway. So if they can get Turkey in there and get European Union money to fund the construction of the pipeline, it might be possible that when Russia and Iran raise objections on environmental grounds, that there would be a counterweight from Turkey and countries in Europe to say that that's all right, we got it under control. You've signed on to a Caspian Sea Charter that says there's no problem for two countries to connect their pipelines as long as it's just running through their own maritime space, which is true of Azerbaijan and Turkmenistan. There really should be no problem. According to the letter of the charter, there should be no problem for the Turkmenistan to build a pipeline to Azerbaijan, legally speaking. But what they need is someone with clout that comes in behind them and says, "We're watching this, and it's none of your business in Tehran, and it's none of your business in Moscow."
Final question: how do you see the future of Turkmenistan's natural gas industry evolving over the next decade?
Unfortunately for the government, it has a really bad record. It's incredibly opaque. They don't allow onshore contracts. While this deal seems to be so easy and attractive to so many parties, the problem is that you just can't trust the Turkmen authorities, and they won't open their books and let people look at it, what's going on. They're very disadvantageous deals, and they have a long track record of this. I can't see that any country or any companies are going to be incredibly enthusiastic about this, given the current environment. Now, if Turkmenistan gets very desperate and decides that they're going to allow people to have onshore contracts, that they're going to use some of their own money to build the pipeline, which is what the Azerbaijani president has been telling them to do for the last 6 or 7 years. He said, we have SOCAR, and they invested in the TANAP pipeline through Turkey. SOCAR is the major investor in that. You should use your money the same way in Turkmenistan and help fund the construction of the Trans-Caspian. So if they give onshore contracts, if they're willing to put their own money into the pipeline, there's a sign that they have some confidence in it, and be more transparent in their business dealings, then it could work. But like I said, in the current environment and given the history of Turkmenistan, they are such an unattractive partner that Turkmenistan is looking at, they're already on hard economic times, and it's about to get much worse. If Russia really does start shipping 35 billion cubic meters of gas through those pipelines to China, Turkmenistan's going to be in a horrible, horrible position.
And that's a lot of food for thought for many people in this sector. Bruce, do you have a social media account people can reach out to you on?
Yeah. Obviously, you can. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, and then of course on Twitter at Bruce Pannier, capital B and then capital P for Pannier. It's easy to find me. So if you have any questions or any comments, feel free.
Bruce, thanks very much for joining us again today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being on the program.